Not all gaming laptops are the size of cinder blocks, but going with smaller form factors like this one does pose a risk for thermals. And that's one of the things we're going to be looking at today with MSI's GE62 Apache Pro gaming laptop. This is the 6QD model of those. It's got an i7-6700HQ and a GTX 960M. We've got all the specs on the screen now. This particular model is $1,300. There's a 970M version of this with slight changes to the storage capacity and memory capacity for $1,500. First off, check our full in-depth article linked in the description below for more information and charts that might not be here. This benchmark looks at gaming performance, battery life, thermals, and overall build quality of the laptop. We've recently done overclocking with laptops, actually with the CyberPower ThinkBook 4, running the newest Intel unlocked laptop CPU. That's a K SKU for laptops. We also reviewed MSI's GT62 Dominator Pro G, a stark difference from this one, and that had a GTX 980 desktop GPU in it, believe it or not. And that was an interesting test because it was the first fully unlocked desktop GPU in a laptop. The Apache Pro, the one we're looking at today, takes on a more reasonable and genuinely portable form factor, running 15.6 inches for the screen at 1080p with an IPS panel and a total unit size of 15 by 10.24 by 1.14 inches. The IPS panel affords excellent viewing angles for a laptop, though use cases for that are generally limited to times when you might have more than one person looking at the screen. Otherwise, it's a fairly standard 1080p display with vibrant colors and brightness. The most overlooked aspect of laptops in reviews is the ability to effortlessly maintain the components within the laptop, and for our enthusiast audience, that's a pretty important feature for laptops, just ease of access, because we're the type of people, the viewers and of course staff, who would rather fix the laptop's problems, maybe add new thermal paste or whatever, than send it in for warranty or repair or buy a new laptop. So one of the things we're looking at here is that ease of access with the back panel and component accessibility to the user without having to pull apart the entire chassis and keyboard and display and everything like you do in a lot of laptops. Removing the back panel of the GE62 reveals an ideal layout. Everything's there under one panel, no futzing with the keyboard and chassis to get into secret compartments for RAM or GPU access. The gumstick SSD, HDD, RAM, CPU, GPU, and cooling fans are also all here under one panel. And if for some reason you had to apply a new thermal compound to the laptop's heat sinks, it'd be less than 30 minutes of work, which of course is something that generally does have to happen at some point with these long service lives for the laptops. Speaking as someone who's once held a job that required 40 to 50 hours a week of laptop testing and disassembly for thermal analysis, this one is about as good as it gets. The GE62 is very easy to disassemble, put back together, and access all of the core components. The thermal design is also pretty straightforward. A couple of large copper heat sinks meet at alloy heat sinks that cover the GPU and CPU, so the copper heat pipes are used for, they've actually got liquid inside of them, as you may know from our previous videos. That liquid just moves from one end to the other, does a phase change into gas at one point, and that's what does all of the thermal conductivity and dissipation from the silicon. So these terminate in standard cooling fans at the ends with an alloy heatsink in the center. Ventilation is present in the front of the chassis as intake, rear as exhaust, and bottom for general breathability, and there are two axial fans in the system at opposite corners. Audio is a big thing for laptops too. It's one of those things that you can't really fix once you've bought it. So personally speaking, I've got an old Asus BAL series laptop, and that has speakers that are so bad I've basically got to plug peripherals, headset, or speakers into it in order to actually hear the sound coming out of the system, because the speakers are that bad. So it's always important to us to look at how powerful the audio is in a laptop when we're reviewing it. And with these newer ones, the trend, and that's included with this laptop, there are actually subwoofers on the bottom of these things. So there is a subwoofer right here. You can see the little speaker cover, and that is supposed to help with bass, of course, but we'll see how it works in the real world. The Apache GE62 has a subwoofer in the bottom and speakers on the top near the display. Audio is loud, but not necessarily powerful for things like music. The bass, despite MSI's use of a subwoofer, is weak and outperformed by the flat EQ of the overall sound system. Everything sort of emits the same volume level, so highs, things like hi-hats, will often drown out midtones. For a laptop, though, we're pretty happy with the raw noise output overall. Before diving into benchmarks, I've got 2 core points of criticism for this laptop. Software bloat's a big problem for the GE62, and it's sort of disappointing because I haven't had software bloat issues for years now. Most of the SIs, or system integrators, and manufacturers like MSI have improved with time and have really gone a long way to remove the bloat in their pre-built systems and laptops. With the GE62, it comes with, one, a really obnoxious MSI warranty registration program. It basically just pops up and tells you to register the warranty constantly, and it's really hard to get rid of. So that's one thing, but then it's also got the killer networking software, which I really frankly do not like at all. So it's got killer, it's got the MSI warranty thing, it has an RGB LED control for the keyboard, which of course you need, otherwise why would you have the RGB LED keyboard? It's got controls for the touchpad and all the gestures and inputs and things like that, separate controls for more keyboard functions, and then some Intel software that is also useless. So there's a lot of stuff on there. Oh, and Norton, how could I forget? Norton, the plague upon PC gamers everywhere, because even though it is a solid AV in some aspects, especially corporate, it's really not necessary for gamers, and it does pretty massively slow down boot times and things like that, at least with the version that's on here. So that is something I would rather not have pre-installed and just sort of leave it up to the user of, do you want to install something like MSE or Avast or something lighter weight? And this is maybe something that laptop manufacturers and SIs could listen to for the future. I think maybe looking into some sort of service like Ninite or similar basically pops up when they turn on the laptop and says, what things do you want? They check it and then it installs it. That would be a better solution if you want to enable users who are maybe less savvy to get the software, but also not weigh everyone down with garbage. So that is the main complaint here, is just bloatware. You can uninstall it all, of course, but why would you want to do that if you're just trying to buy a good gaming laptop out the gate? There also were issues with the embedded controller firmware and BIOS, which had the fans operating at low speeds that allowed massive heat accumulation. We had the CPU running at 41C delta T over ambient idle, again, which is about 61 Celsius in our environment absolute. That is completely unacceptable, and the surface of the laptop, the part that you actually touch with your wrist, is about 105 Fahrenheit under these conditions. Definitely uncomfortable as a user. Fortunately, we were able to work with MSI to resolve this problem with the EC and BIOS updates, and that's something we explain in another video on the channel that's already live. Let's look at the gaming benchmarks and see how this thing actually performs for video games. All of our test methodology and system specs are detailed in the article linked below or on gamersnexus.net. Battery life testing will also be available in more depth on the site. Thermals first. The GE62 had severe issues when we first got it thermally, so these results were collected after fixing the EC and BIOS with those updates. Thermal results are on screen. We've currently changed and updated our testing methodology, so all of these laptops on the chart have been rechecked and updated as necessary. It's not fully comparable to our previous test because of methodology changes. After the EC and BIOS flash, the GE62 Apache performs reasonably well at 34.5 C delta T over ambient for the GPU and 28.1 C delta T for the CPU. Both are definitely acceptable temperatures and generally cooler than most of the other laptops we've tested. The PCH runs a bit warm at roughly 35 Celsius delta T, but is still acceptable. Before updates, our temperatures were nearing about 60 Celsius delta T when under load for just the CPU, so that is quite a hike, and it's a worthwhile EC and BIOS update if you end up buying one of these. The GE62 runs pretty cool post-update given its portable form factor and rough 1-inch thickness. Here's a quick look at the battery life chart for our laptops. We run Grid Autosport non-stop using the high-performance Windows profile. No AC adapter connected, of course, during this time, and we check the event log for the inevitable shutdown and then extrapolate a time in that fashion. Most gaming laptops last between 45 minutes and a little over an hour, depending on how powerful the GPU component is and how hot the CPU runs. Time for gaming stuff. Competitively, the GTX 960M is obviously significantly underpowered versus the 970M and 980 units on this bench. It's also a $1,300 laptop, so that makes it much more affordable than the other stuff we've reviewed, which tends to be in the $2,000 to $3,000 range. Nothing's really all that playable at ultra settings with 1080p resolution on the 960M. GTA 5 is the first example, where we see about 33 FPS average, and the lows are actually timed pretty tightly, so that is a good thing despite the low averages overall. Unfortunately, that low overall average does mean it's too low to properly enjoy the game at these settings, and the 970M is much more reasonable, especially when overclocked, but the 980M is where you'd have to be for 60 FPS, if that matters to you. With Dirt Rally, we saw about 32 FPS average with tightly timed lows on the 960M. The 970M laptop is a huge step up, running almost 60 FPS average and is totally playable on Ultra. Shadow of Mordor pushes the GE62 Apache Pro beyond its limits as it falls below 30 FPS, hitting just 29 FPS average. The same is true for Metro Last Light. Generally, a GTX 970M gets you a fairly playable frame rate at Ultra, with tweaks anyway, on all of these games, but it's not until The Witcher 3 that everything suffers on Ultra, and that's fair since the game is so intensive. Here's a quick chart showing medium settings on only the 960M. As you can see here, it's suddenly significantly more playable on all of these titles. We're hitting 50 plus FPS in a lot of cases, and that's just fine for a $1,300 laptop. If you're on a budget and a bit over $1,000 is your sort of target to spend, and you're willing to sacrifice down to medium settings, then the GE62 does have good performance. The GE62 is the kind of laptop you would be buying if you travel a lot or haul it back and forth on a day-to-day basis, maybe to school or work, and that is something that it's good at. It's generally small. It's got a 960M, which is powerful enough, but not so powerful that it forces the laptop into a larger chassis sort of format. And the GTX 980 and 970 laptops that are above this one, or 970M and 980M laptops, do definitely have a lot more output in terms of power or performance. You're able to hit those 50 FPS sort of averages at a minimum with most of these games, or at least something like 48. So that does make them a lot more playable on Ultra. If you're willing to drop down to something like medium and you're on a budget of around $1,300, then this is actually a good laptop for those things. The really only key points that we had about the laptop that were bad were the bloatware. So that's one thing, but you can fix that by sitting there and uninstalling stuff for half an hour. And the other point was the high thermals stock. And that's resolved with an EC and a BIOS update, assuming MSI doesn't just start shipping the laptops with those things pre-installed. The next thing here, this does have a 970M cousin. It's the same laptop with a 970M in it, slightly different storage spec, but pretty similar overall. And that is $200 more, that's $1,500. And for the $200 price jump, it sort of is worth it if you are the type of person who just can't stand looking at medium settings. Now 1080 medium with these games, even though we always talk about Ultra, it still looks pretty damn good, especially for the price. But if you really need high or maybe pushing to Ultra settings in some cases, obviously you got to be connected to AC when you're doing that, then the $200 would be worthwhile. So that's the GE62 6QD Apache Pro mouthful gaming laptop. Check the link in the description below for more information and hit the Patreon link in the post-roll video to help us out directly. Thank you for watching. I'll see you all next time.